Rise of the Floodborn's been out for 1 week now, so we've seen some competitive events, got some good results, and we've all just played with the cards a lot now, so we know kind of what's going to be good and what's not. Obviously, a lot's going to change in the future, but this is my ranking of the top 10 decks for week 1 of Rise of the Floodborn. I'm thinking of doing this every Monday, kind of like a Meta Monday kind of thing, just ignore the fact it's Tuesday today. So if that's something you're interested in, be sure to subscribe, just to stay up to date with the meta, give yourself that competitive edge. And of course, as always, comment if there's anything you disagree with, and I'll improve it for the next video. Let's just get right into it. So to start off our countdown, at number 10 we've got Resist Zoo. This deck has recently been created by a friend of mine, Alphos. So if you want an in-depth deck guide for this deck, I'll leave it in the description below. But other than that, the game plan for this deck in particular is you just kind of want to go wide, create these really annoying boards for your opponent to deal with, and then use cards like Aurora and Cogsworth to give them ward and resist, just to make it really difficult for the opponent to clear. And we're going to use the Pawpsicle engine, which has been really popular at the moment, to just ensure we have enough card draw. And because we've got super wide boards, we can use Strength of a Raging Fire to just do basically what Dragonfire wants to do. So we've got the general control tools of Steel, but just with the kind of mid-range zoo style that Sapphire brings to the table in this set. Now once you get to the later stages of the game, we have a little bit of ramp to get to Tamatoa and Hades just for that board control, but the main goal is just to go super wide, get resist, ward, and just make it really difficult for the opponent to counter against. Now of course this deck is countered single-handedly by Be Prepared, but if you're playing against anything other than Ruby, you should have like an okay matchup. Against Aggro you should be okay as well, because you just have like Grab Your Sword and you are going to be spamming a lot of units on the board anyway. You should have a decent matchup against Aggro in general. Like I say as well, you've also got Hades to get rid of big Tamatoas in that matchup, although you might find a bit of difficulty playing against that deck just because they generate so much card advantage, but we'll talk a lot about that deck in a moment. Okay, so next up at number 9, we've got one of my personal favourites from set 1, this is Evasives. They've lost a little bit of power due to cards like Cruella and Jafar being really strong counters, but other than that, we've just seen some really strong additions to the archetype. Mainly you want to talk about Ray. This card is just a free that quests for free, but it's an inkable 5 cost, so it's just quite good really. Another fantastic inclusion from set 2 is this Mini Mouse Surfer, which can quest for 2 and it's a 1/3, really annoying for your opponent to deal with. So the main problem with Evasives in set 1 is that they didn't have any card draw, so thankfully we've got this new Donald Duck, which allows us to draw a card. The opponent does get to draw a card as well, but because we're playing aggro, we just kind of want to end the game as quick as possible, so giving the opponent more cards is fine because we're seeing more cards. We're still kicking it with the Cusco, the card's still just good. There's not really a way to answer it necessarily before it can quest for free. There are some more options now in set 2, but the card is still overall just really solid. And then we see this new Shift Cheshire Cat, which a 6 health evasive unit can be really annoying for the opponent to deal with. So if you get to shift into that, then we're having a good time really. The general game plan is you want to just kind of go to 6 ink and then just draw cards and just kind of play whatever you draw really. We have Mother Knows Best, Dragonfire, Genie, and Maui for that mid-game board control, just really solid for tempo. You never want to get to the late game with this deck, so mid-game is kind of as late as we want to go, so those are our mid-game tools. And then for the early game, we've just kind of got cards that quest for a lot, and they're annoying for the opponent to deal with. Your matchup spread should be pretty okay. It generally just depends on if the opponent has an answer for the evasive keyword. If they don't, you should have a pretty good time, and if they do, then you're probably going to lose. But that's kind of just the gimmick of the deck. Overall though, it's a really solid budget list that you can get for probably under $100, I'd say. So this is a good one for you budget players who don't really want to invest too much in the game and still get results. So at number 8, we've got Amethyst Mill. This is a newer deck created by Zeph. It's a really tricky deck to play, so I'm not going to get too into the deck tech in this video, but if you want to see that, there definitely will be one on the channel very soon. I just got to figure it out for myself. So the game plan is kind of, you control the board and then you can either go for just controlling and just beating the opponent out in the aggro matchup, or in the control matchup you can mill them out of Whole New World. So how do you cycle Whole New World is you want to use the Magic Brooms from set 1. And then a really cool thing you can do with this deck is you can use the Yzma and the Madam Mim to kind of control the board of your opponent and shuffle it back into their deck. They do get to draw 2 cards, but then you Whole New World the 2 cards that they've just drawn anyway, so it just mills them even further. So it's definitely a ton of fun to play. You've still got all the Tinkerbell options. You've still got Smash, Grab Your Sword, Friends on the Other Side. You can also use the Merlin Rabbit with the Madam Mim to kind of kamikaze it and get a budget Friends on the Other Side basically. It's really consistent as well because you do have like Ursula's Cauldron and just lots of card draw. There are some really tricky loops you can do to make sure you don't deck out, but I've got this deck at number 8. I definitely will say, take this with a pinch of salt. I haven't really tested this deck too much. I just know it's quite good when I did play it. And like I say, there will be a in-depth deck guide on the channel at some point. Okay, so at number 7, we've got one of the most hyped decks that we had going into the start of set 2. This is Beast Combo. This is a really, really fun deck. I'm just not sure how competitive it necessarily is. So this is the deck list. The kind of general game plan is you want to kind of control the board, not worry too much about questing, obviously still quest if you can, and then play a 6 cost beast, and then kind of use all your ping damage to just reset the beast, and it can quest each time you ping damage basically. A really cool interaction with this deck you can do is you can sing grab your sword with beast and it will reset itself. So you can sing with beast for free basically, so grab your sword to cost 0, and then you can just keep questing with beast, and you can hit some really crazy numbers. I think it is definitely possible for the deck to quest for 20 in a single turn, albeit it's not going to happen every single game, but it definitely can happen. The only issue necessarily with the deck is that you need your opponent to have a really wide exerted board, and generally if they have a really wide exerted board, you're kind of in a losing position anyway. I think as well the meta is quite fast, so getting to turn 6 and then playing a beast and doing nothing else just isn't really going to get you there most of the time. But in the games where beast does hop off, the deck is a ton of fun, and it can definitely compete at local events. I'm not sure how competitive it is at the higher tier events, which we don't really have yet, but definitely give this deck a go. It's a ton of fun, like I say, and you can get some really cool wins with it. One more time, it is still a solid deck, just not compared to the decks that we have coming up. Okay, so getting to some of the more competitive decks now, I'm going to go ahead and say that these next 6 decks are definitely leagues above the other 4 that I've got on the list. We've got Emerald, Amber, Discard, Aggro. Discard was a very hyped word going into the release of set 2 just because there was so much support for it. The main kind of gist is that you want to go for Prince John. This card has Ward, and whenever your opponent discards a card, you get to draw a card for each card they discarded. And Daisy Duck, which whenever it quests, your opponent chooses and discards a card. We've also got Flynn Rider from set 1, which every time it's challenged, that player has to discard a card. And of course there are some other cards that allow you to discard cards as well. So we're going to pair that with Amber. Now Amber of course has You Have Forgotten Me, which just discards 2 cards, which is great. That's exactly what we want to do. And then we also see this new Queen, which is a just 1 cost 2/2, very standard. We've seen it a lot in set 1 and a lot in set 2. But we see this 5 cost Queen, which has Shift 2, quest for 2. It just allows you to just control the board from turn 2 basically. It's just a really solid effect. Giving your own cards attack and getting rid of attack of the opponent makes it so you can kind of play a mid-range style if you have to, just get board control that way. It just gives you a lot of tempo. The big finisher for this deck and the card that kind of makes it so aggressive is this Flynn Rider. It does quest for 4, and it does have evasive, but for each card in your opponent's hand it has -1 quest or 1 lore. So obviously 4 cards in your opponent's hand isn't that much, which means this card doesn't quest for anything. But because we're playing so much discard, the opponent's only really going to have 1 or 2. So an evasive card that can shift on top of another card you already have and quest for 2 is still pretty solid. And there are some games where you are just going to be able to spam out all your discard package and just have this card quest for just an infinite amount, really. Yeah, we do see some card draw with Hypnotize, which is a new card which also discards a card from your opponent's hand. And then of course we do still use this Rapunzel from set 1, which is going to draw us a lot of cards and keep our stuff alive. General counters to this deck then are just going to be Steel, as always, just the AoE board clears. It's just never fun for an aggro deck to have to face against. And then the new up-and-coming Pawpsicle engine that everyone is just really hyped about at the moment is just all about drawing as many cards as possible. So the opponent's always going to have cards in hand and give themselves options, and because they can choose what they discard, they can always just get rid of cards that they don't really need in the matchup. So that's going to be a poor matchup for you there. But against kind of people that aren't playing the top meta decks, this deck has a really good matchup against a lot of them, really. So overall, a really good deck. I would say if your locals or the scene that you're playing in is really competitive and they're going to be playing only decks that are super good, then maybe don't kind of get your hopes up for this deck. This is definitely one of those decks that beats unrefined decks. So just keep that in mind when you build and play this deck. But overall, it's a really solid deck, and it's really fun. And when it does pop off, it really pops off. You can get Queen on turn 2, and just start doing some crazy things. But yeah, that's the deck. Alright, so moving on to number 5, we've got Alice. This deck is mainly centered around Alice, but it is kind of just your classic Amber, Sapphire, mid-range deck. Again, we're seeing this 1-cost Queen with the option to shift on turn 2. Now, this has a really cool interaction with Alice, which is the main card of the deck. Alice gives all your cards support, right? So Queen has 4 attack on its own, and it gives one of your other characters +4 attack as well when it quests. So if you choose Alice with both of this support and the effect, you're giving Alice +8 attack, which gets it to 9, which means you just need anything else to get support, quest, and give Alice the attack, and then Alice can quest for 5, which is insane on a free cost. We also do see the old reliable set 1 staples of Rapunzel and Surfer Stitch as your kind of card draw engines. We see Hades to kind of give you the loop and let you recycle a lot of cards. We're also seeing Cogsworth, which gives all your cards resist, which resist is really, really strong. And it's really good against steel in particular, just because it kind of halves their damage, really. We also see Ariel, which this was the meta-defining card of set 1. This gives you options to search for a lot of removal. In this deck particularly, you can look for Let It Go, which is kind of just like an inkable, findable, singable Dragonfire, right? So it's just a better Dragonfire all around. And you can sing that with Ariel as early as turn 3. I wouldn't really recommend playing it on turn 3. Mainly recommend saving it for those bigger units later on in the game. We also see Be Our Guest, which gives your characters resist 2 until the start of your next turn. So combine that with Cogsworth, and all your cards have resist 3, which means they're basically going to be like invincible going into your next turn. Another song we see is World's Greatest Criminal Mind. This card says you banish chosen character with 5 attack or more. This does have some uses, but I think the main use for it right now is going to be to get rid of big Tamatoas. Right now, Tamatoa only really goes down to spot removal. It's very hard to remove because it has so much health. But because you have 4 Let It Goes and 4 World's Greatest Detectives, you're going to have a lot of options to remove it for free, just through songs. Another cool thing you can do with this deck is where Alice gives all your other characters support, you can get support, give your opponent's characters the extra attack, and then use World's Greatest Criminal Mind to get rid of them that way. And then some other things we see is just Sisu, which gets you just some more card draw atomic quests, which is another card from set 2. Overall, this is a really consistent deck list. It doesn't do anything crazy, which I think is the problem with it. A lot of the decks right now are doing crazy things. This deck is just kind of like a very strong, consistent deck. It doesn't do anything crazy. It's very honest. It wins games. It loses games. It should have a solid matchup against Control. It should have a solid matchup against Aggro, but it doesn't win those matchups like automatically. So it's a very skill expressive deck. You kind of have to play really well every game you play with this deck to win a lot of games, whereas a lot of the decks above it, you kind of can just get lucky and do some crazy unfair things. But other than that, it's a really solid deck, a little bit on the expensive side if I'm being honest. So I'd maybe recommend, if you want to go all in and just play one deck, play one of the decks that I'm going to talk about next. But yeah, that's Alice Midrange. So number 4, we have this hyper aggro deck, which is probably the easiest deck I have played in Lorcana so far. The general idea is you just kind of want to vomit your whole hand onto the board and turn the card sideways to quest, and that's generally it. We have a lot of card draw, we have a lot of aggression. A really cool thing you can do is play Cinderella on turn 1. And she has Sing of 3, so what you can do is on turn 2, you can sing Friends on the Other Side to draw 2 cards, and then you can bounce the Cinderella back to your hand to play Madam Mim, which means you're up 2 cards in hand, and you have a 3/3 on the board in turn 2. Although that is kind of on the slower side for this deck. Generally, you just want to play Lilo, Maleficent, Pinocchio, Simba to protect them, and then kind of go into your Rush Madam Mims to just bounce back cards to protect them. So obviously when you quest, they're excited, you can bounce them back to your hand, just play them, effectively giving them some kind of like, I guess, kind of budget evasive is what I'm going to say, but that's not really what I mean. Hope you kind of get what I'm trying to say there. Then we also have Merlin Goat, which can just kind of squeak extra lore in later on in the game. Befuddle to just buy you those really early turns. Rapunzel for more card draw. The Pinocchio, which is a 2 cost, which can quest for free, is insane. Arthur is another fantastic card which does those same things I was talking about, where you can kind of protect your cards in a way, but when you protect them you gain more lore. You can also use Merlin Rabbit to draw cards, Merlin Goat to just like burn some lore. You've still got the Simba to protect. Overall you're just vomiting characters onto the board, just drawing an absolute boatload of cards, and most of the time with this deck, as long as you just draw and mulligan okay, you're going to be ending it by turn 5. The obvious counters is going to be Steel, which, like I say, in this kind of rock, paper, scissors meta, you're going to lose to Steel and you're going to beat Control, generally. And that's kind of how it goes. If you play against any other kind of decks that we spoke about previously to this, you're probably going to have a pretty good time because they're not going to have many ways to deal with it. Basically, with this deck, dodge Steel and you have a fantastic time. End the game on turn 5. and just, vomit your whole hand and turn the card sideways is the general game plan with this deck. So for deck number 3, we've got Ruby Amethyst Bounce. Now this deck is really creative, honestly. We're seeing this whole bounce package, which everyone kind of has known for a long time now. It's a lot better than people were expecting, hence why it's number 3 on this list. The general game plan is kind of just to control the board for your opponent and kind of just whittle them down until they can't do anything. You also have the option to go really, really fast. The MVP of this deck is definitely Arthur. Being able to bounce and gain lore is just very strong. So for the control aspect rather than the aggro aspect, we do still have the Be Prepared and the Maleficence, which are like staple control tools from set 1. But we now see Lady Tremaine, which is kind of like a Dragonfire on a stick if you play it well. Forcing your opponent to banish one of their characters sounds quite strong already, but when you clear their board, you force them to banish the only character they have left on the board. Which is very easily done with this deck. We're not running any Dragonfires because I just believe that Lady Tremaine is probably a bit better. We do see this free cost Aladdin, which makes your opponent lose a lore. We're not seeing the shift one. That's because you can bounce this Aladdin to make them lose lore, and when you're making them lose lore by bouncing Aladdin and gaining your own lore with the Merlin Goat, it just creates this really strong like dynamic of kind of stealing lore in a way, but not necessarily. You can kind of decide if you want them to lose lore or you want yourself to gain lore. We do still see some card draw friends on the other side. I will say this list in particular isn't necessarily a full control list. It's more of a mid-range bounce list, kind of its own thing. My favorite thing about this list in particular is the Pinocchio. This is kind of a cheaper Elsa. So obviously the 8 cost Elsa from set 1 exerts 2 of your opponent's characters, but when you play Pinocchio, you can bounce it, play it again, bounce it, play it again, and then say you do spend this like 8 ink, generally you can exert 2 or maybe 3 of your opponent's cards, and it gives you a kind of better effect than the Elsa, and also you can keep it back in your hand so you kind of protect it and you can do it again the next turn. Generally with this deck you're going to have quite a good time against a lot of aggro. I think your hardest kind of archetype to beat is kind of mid-range, which will be like Amber and Steel. But yeah, this is a really interesting take on the deck that I'm showcasing here. This is from someone at my locals, but there are other control options which lean more into the control archetype for Ruby Amethyst. Okay, so this is the big one. I'm sure a lot of you are expecting this to be number 1, but I've actually got it at number 2. This is Pawpsicle, Tamatoa, Control, Ramp, whatever you want to call it. Ruby Sapphire, basically. That's just utilizing the Pawpsicle engine to cycle through your whole deck extremely quickly. So when I talk about Pawpsicle, I just mean this item, which lets you draw a card. And then we combine that with Judy Hopps to banish an item, and then you draw another card when you banish it. Nick Wild, which recycles your Pawpsicle, and then the big card, which no one expected to be as good as it actually is, Hiram Flavisham. Whenever you play it and whenever he quests, you can banish one of your items, of course, to draw a further 2 cards. So you create these really cool loops with those cards in particular, just to enable you to draw so many cards, and you just always have the options available, basically, to kind of do whatever you want and control the board that way. We see Noi or Noi, I'm not sure how it's kind of pronounced. Whenever you have an item in play, it gains resist 1 and ward. Fantastic card against any aggro list. It kind of carries the kind of aggro matchup with Queen of Hearts, which is just a 2-2 with Rush. We do see some Raptors of Grammatella and 1 Drop Ahead, which allow you to get to the Tamatoa. Now this card has 8 health, so it's very difficult for your opponent to get rid of once it's on the board. And because we have so many items with Shield of Virtue, Pawpsicle, and Fishbone Quill, Tamatoa is going to be questing for a lot. You don't need it, but it definitely is one of the most fun cards in the game to use. Once you kind of get all these items out in play and you play a big card and just quest for a lot, it just feels really satisfying. We do see Scar as well to clear out those super wide boards. It does have Rush, so it can go straight away. And when it's attacking and resetting itself, you can use the Pawpsicles to just heal it back up, which is why Ruby goes so well with Sapphire. Again, we see Lady Tremaine. I'm not going to talk about it again. It does the same thing in this deck as it did in the last one. But other than that, it's a really solid list. Everyone's playing it right now. It's very hyped and everyone's really enjoying it. And everyone is kind of thinking it is the deck to beat right now. I think, like I've mentioned before, this rock, paper, scissors meta, this deck kind of loses to aggro most of the time. It does beat the mid-range matchup. Well, here we are at number 1. What a shock. Amber Steel is still the best deck going into set 2. Not sure if it will stay this way for the following weeks as the meta kind of adapts and people kind of learn the matchups a bit more and kind of experiment a bit more. But this is definitely one of these safer options to go for. And I've got it at number 1 for week 1. Not sure how this will hold, but right now I definitely think this is the deck to play. The reason I say this is because aggro is really strong right now. You play Steel, so you just kind of beat aggro most of the time. And Amber does have access to World's Greatest Criminal Mind, which is an answer to Tamatoa, which this deck does struggle against. I think because Amber Steel's main thing is that it wants to generate as much card advantage as possible, when you're playing against Sapphire and they're just doing all these Pawpsicle loops, they're generating a lot of cards as well, so it's difficult to get that kind of card advantage that you necessarily want. We do see some changes in this deck from set 1. We see Benja, which is essentially just a power creeped beast. Beast costs 5, this card costs 3. They essentially do the same thing and they quest for the same amount. The stats are kind of irrelevant. Once you kind of get the item out of the way, you've got the item out of the way. And that's another reason why I think this deck can kind of adapt itself to beat the Tamatoa. Again, we're still seeing the Aerial, which on turn 3 can find you a whole new world or grab your sword to go from there. We have Ramp with Lantern, and we also see this new Beast Tragic Hero, which at the start of your turn, if it has no damage on it, you get to draw a card, which is just really, really strong. We're not seeing any healing in this deck necessarily, unless it's the Rapunzel, which is just another fantastic card that we've spoke about a lot. We see this new song, Let the Storm Rage On, which in my opinion is just a better smash. It does only deal 2 damage, but it does draw you a card and you can sing it, and it's uninkable. So I think it's better than Smash, but we'll see. Maybe I'm just excited by the new cards. And then the big card to talk about is the Cinderella, which has Resist 2, which is insane. And whenever you play a song, it can challenge ready characters this turn. I think this is the only card right now that can do that, I think. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure this is the only character right now that can attack ready characters, which is just a fantastic tool to kind of give you that tempo and essentially make your opponent waste a turn later on in the games. And because it's shift 5, you can play it as early as turn 5, because we still have this 1-cost Cinderella with Sing of 3, which can sing this Let the Storm Rage On that we just spoke about, which is just really strong tempo. You can also sing World's Greatest Criminal Mind, which means you can essentially get rid of Tamatoa over 1 cost. And yeah, it's just a really solid deck, and I think it just works. We still see the Rockstar Stitch package. We do see a lot of 1 costs, which are really powerful. We see the Stitch itself, which lets us shift into the Rockstar Stitch if we find it. We have the Cinderella, which can sing and then shift later on. And the Queen, which again can shift on turn 2 into this 5-cost Queen. So you just have a lot of really strong tempo tool, lots of high rolls to kind of play for in this deck. And I haven't even spoke about Tinkerbell, which was just a fantastic card in set 1. But yeah, like I say, I think this deck can adapt to beat Tamatoa. It has a very good matchup against Control, and it kind of just works. Like how I was saying with Sapphire Amber just kind of being like a really consistent deck. I think this is just a really consistent deck, but just way stronger basically. So that's it for the top 10. Hopefully I've given you kind of just my insight on the meta, and hopefully you agree. If you disagree, then leave a comment on what you disagree on, and I'll get around to it for week 2. Hopefully we see some new results. There'll be deck guides on all these decks coming soon on the channel, so if that's what you're interested in, then subscribe. Make sure you're up to date with the meta, make sure you know what to play to your events. Other than that, thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.